Is what we saw Saturday the real Iowa offense, at least in the second half, a rewatch of the Iowa win 40-0 over Illinois State. Plus, Scott Dochterman joins us from The Athletic. All today, Locked On Hawkeyes.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We're available wherever you find podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube. While you're there, hit the subscribe button. Helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate College Football HC. Ultimate College Football HC is a brand new mobile game that is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, LOCKEDONCFB, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Begin your coaching legacy today. Glad to have you aboard with us as we get ready for game 2 of the season. It goes fast. It is furious. It is college football, but it is so good to have it back as things conclude here this evening. Florida State goes to 0-2 on the year, but we're here to talk about the Hawkeyes and after the win against Illinois State. So I went back last night and had a rewatch of the game against Illinois State. A couple of takeaways from that. Watching the game now for a second time. Of course, they're live in person at Kinnick Stadium on Saturday, as everydayers know, talked about that a little bit last week. Going from that, watching some highlights on Saturday, and then going through the full game and watching all the plays for a second or at times third time in this one. Couple things jumped off to me. First, we talked about this in the Instant Reaction podcast that, yes, it was frustrating at times that first half of the football game, and it felt like there were some things left on the field. There certainly were. In fact, Iowa was even closer, I think, to blowing this thing out early as opposed to what happened in the second half of the football game. The game plan for Illinois State was really good, and they were crashing hard. And we heard Tim Lester talk throughout the spring and the summertime that his offense is still predicated on establishing the run. And the traditional Shanahan offense with the zone blocking scheme, Kirk Ferentz loves the zone blocking scheme. You saw many of the same issues, I think, that we saw throughout the last 4, 5, 6 years now since the rule change in college football. What Illinois State did is when they saw those zone plays, the either defensive end or the outside linebacker came crashing down and were able to get plays. You know, Kamari Moulton, I don't think we saw his best on Saturday. Doesn't have maybe the same kind of wiggle, the juice that we saw a year ago. But remember, he's playing at a bigger weight. And I think there's something to do with that. But it was also what Illinois State was done before Caleb Johnson took over at the running back spot in the second half. That is something that the motion, the screen motion, the jet sweep motion, that Iowa uses, that's how they're going to be able to keep teams more at bay. And I think it's going to help out this running game. At times it was dead upon arrival. The former play caller didn't have a great knack of dialing those plays up at the right time, but that's something that is needed because with the blocking rules in college football, you're just not able to cut that guy on the outside, on the weak side of the formation when you're running it. And because of that, you have so many guys that just come free. And it can be well executed, well blocked out in front of that outside zone blocking. But if it's taking long to develop, if you're waiting, the running back's waiting for those blocks to develop a little bit and looking for the cutback lane, before you can find that cutback lane, boom, you're hit from behind for a 2-yard loss or a 2-yard gain, or it's a short gain if you're even getting a gain out of it. And saw a lot of that during the first half of that one. Mentioned Cade McNamara, his struggles and the way that he really turned it on in the second half. And, watching it a second time, there were misses, no doubt. The throw in the end zone, if he just would have led Luke Lachey, that was an easy 6. Threw it off his back foot, left that one short. There was a couple of drops in there, too, that certainly didn't help him out. Watching it the second time, though, that first half, and I know there were the crazies out there that were asking for Brendan Sullivan to come into the game and make a change at halftime and throw everything out. This thing is falling apart. Luckily, the coaches were not reading Twitter at halftime and didn't go that direction. But seeing it again that second time, it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was. And I thought it was awful, just absolutely dreadful. Now, I think a part of that too, and probably for all of us, it's a little PTSD, right? watching this Iowa offense and what it's been the last 2.5 years, and you got 6 points on the board. You get a couple of turnovers. You got short fields. All you can get is 3 points out of those 2 short fields. The frustrations were building, but it was penalties. It was a drop. It was these little things that started to add up, and it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought. Remember, they had 150 yards of offense in the first half. We would have killed for 150 yards of offense in a whole game at times a season ago. So, with all that being said, that was a whole lot better. Now, got away with some things in the second half. We talked about the second touchdown to Reese Vander Zee. Boy, I walked away from this game optimistic about this football team. I had them pegged as a 9-3 football team coming into the season. Nothing certainly that I saw Saturday changed my opinion on that. And I think there's more. I think there's more juice that is in this football team that they can squeeze out of it. This has the potential to be a really special season because what I saw from the offensive line, it's real. They're healthy. They're blocking. Yes, I think it's more schematic things with the zone blocking that runs into some of the issues in the run game that we see, but they were decisive. When Ellsbury came in at the center position after Logan Jones exited, he was still very good. Jones comes back in and maybe played his best football of the day after he came back into the football game, which was great to see. You're developing depth on that line. You have a ton of experience. This has a chance to be really, really good. Obviously, if we see the Cade McNamara that we saw in the second half, look out. But even if it's something in between, he's not 13 of 14 as he was in the second half of the game. The only incompletion came on a drop pass. He's not going to be that guy every time, but he's going to be certainly better than the guy that we saw in the first half. Look, we've talked about the benchmarks. Realistic goals for Cade McNamara this year: 15 touchdowns, 5 or less interceptions, complete over 60% of your passes, go north of 2,500 yards. He's already well on pace to do all of those things this season, and I think it can continue. Now, it's Iowa State this week. It's going to be a step up in competition. We'll talk more about Iowa State as the week goes on and get ready for the matchup at Kinnick Stadium coming up on Thursday. We continue here, Locked On Hawkeye. Scott Dochterman from The Athletic, little Hawkeye talk with Doc, who was there in attendance as well. Also, earlier last week, he was up in Minnesota watching the Gophers and the only Big Ten team that couldn't find a way to get it done as the Gophers fall to North Carolina on Saturday. We'll talk some Hawkeye football, though, with Scott Dochterman from The Athletic. We continue. This is the Locked On Hawkeyes Podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Hawkeyes Podcast is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Look, I'm up late. I always am, just the way that I am wired. When I'm up late, get up early, kids are ready to go to school, they're ready to get their day started. Sometimes I just need a 5 Hour Energy. Maybe you're tired after lunch. You're not alone on that one. In fact, research shows more than 70% of us hit the wall after lunch. Let a 5 Hour Energy shot help you leap over that wall instead of crashing into it. You want to get in shape but having trouble staying motivated? Make 5 Hour Energy shots part of your lifestyle and get the energy boost you need to get fit. We all know sometimes you just don't want to go to the gym. Take a 5 Hour Energy shot to give you the feeling and alertness you need to get to the gym. 5 Hour Energy is the brand hardworking people like you use and have trusted for over 20 years to give them the alert, energized feeling they need to get through a busy, hectic day. You always know where to find 5 Hour Energy shots, right at the cash register at nearly every convenience, drug, and grocery store nationwide. Stock up on money-saving multi-packs and make sure you never run out of delicious, energizing 5 Hour Energy shots. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that's the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5 Hour Energy product today. You can use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB. That's LOCKEDONCFB. It's going to get you 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. That's 5hourenergy.com today. What we're seeing there. Well, the Iowa Hawkeyes go out there, a very pedestrian first half. Cade McNamara throwing off his back foot, and then maybe what it was what Seth Wallace said in the locker room, I'm not sure, but whatever it was, it worked in the second half. He looked crisp. He looked sharp. He was making plays all over the field. Caleb Johnson goes out of there. So what's closer to reality? The Iowa we saw in the first half or the Iowa we saw in the second half?
Probably the Iowa we saw at halftime, which means we're still up in the air on this. I would say that what we saw from the second and third quarters is probably what you can see, and that's in the second quarter, you did start to see some rhythm and routine. And unfortunately, I counted 3 drops, and all 3 of them were pretty significant. Mm-hmm. One was a touchdown. One was in the second half. It was the only pass that wasn't complete in the second half. And there was another one there too. And I think overall that the team showed like it was improving over the course of the game. Certainly was in the second half on offense. But there are still some concerns. I mean, let's face it, they're playing an FCS team, and that's clearly not to Iowa's level up front. And obviously its offense wasn't anywhere near what Iowa's defense could do. So I think you should be optimistic. It felt like, okay, they're starting to turn it on. They played better. But I also think that that just means that they're capable of showing a flash and more than they did last year.
Mm-hmm. Defensive line was a concern for a lot of people coming into the season. Doc, we starters aside, we saw Pittman making plays. Obviously, Brian Allen was terrific in the football game. Did that concerns maybe put a little bit on the back burner a little bit, or still some concerns overall depth defensive line? Because Aaron Graves was great. Wyatt Black was double teamed. Deontay Craig made plays, but I saw some guys that made me open up the roster and try to figure out who these dudes were, which is a good sign.
Overall, I think you've got to be pleased. And I think that they were able to go deep the other day and go to 9 deep, I think it was, up front, maybe 10 deep actually. And that's a good thing. That's what you want in a game like this, where you're facing an opponent that, you got to feel like your second team is better than their first team. Mm-hmm. And I think they were able to show that a lot the other day. And, but I don't really know where that's going to go once we, see an Iowa versus Iowa State, Iowa versus Minnesota, Iowa versus Ohio State. That's where that really is going to show up. And I do think that Iowa's, interior tandem of Wyatt Black and Aaron Graves are right there with Ohio State and Michigan as far as having the best tandem in the country. But that said, we want to see what 7 and 8 can do when they're in the lineup late in the second quarter, or if somebody's gassed or it's a long drive. And that remains to be seen. There's still a lot of questions there.
Mentioned Caleb Johnson, what he was able to do in the run game. He is a home run hitter, and he's shown that throughout his career when he's been out there healthy. Moulton got the start. Johnson was suspended for the first half. Does that flip-flop? It looks like LaShawn Williams still working his way back from the injury. He's not getting close to 100% quite yet. How do the carries shake out here at the running back position this week?
Well, on the depth chart, it's considered now an or between Moulton and Johnson. So we'll see. I imagine that's probably the case there. And Caleb Brown is now back in the lineup as second team, but we'll see where that ends up. And Reese Vandersie's first team. So I think in the backfield, Caleb Johnson's your guy, but last year he had some really good games, and then he had games where it just didn't work for him. And I think some of it's style of play. We know LaShawn Williams, what you're going to get, which is if you need kind of inside zone, he's perfect for that. Kamari Moulton showed a lot. I just don't think that there was a lot of consistency in any area when he was running the ball in the first half. But Caleb Johnson's the guy that's got the potential for the upper level, and I think you want to ride that as long as you can, because I do think that when he's playing at a high level, he's the best running back on the roster.
Yep, I agree with you. All right, so let's go to the receivers. And for a two-parter, how serious is Seth Anderson injury? And once he comes back, I mean, hard-pressed to think that Vandersie's going to lose any opportunities as good as he looked. How does the receiver position shake out when Anderson comes back?
I think he's just going to be part of a rotational unit. And right now, Vandersie showed his debut. He was the first true freshman ever to start at Iowa in an season opener, and he had a great game, two touchdown receptions, and I think he's in the Army. He's going to play and he's going to start from now on. Jacob Gill has done nothing but really not only improve, but prove himself to this team. And he's one of the more beloved players on the team because he is willing to do what it takes. He took a couple of hard hits, and so did Vanderzee. He got a couple of slants across the middle. So I think both of those guys are there for sure. And then Caleb Brown, to me, is, once he works himself out of this suspension, which now he's back, he's listed behind Caden Weegan, but I would expect him to play a lot. Those, to me, are your first three, the way it's based right now, with Weegan getting some action, with Bowie, Terrell Washington, and then I think Anderson when he's healthy. And I'm not so sure when he's going to be back. He hasn't really played a whole lot, at all this August, and he hasn't really played a lot in his career. So I don't know where he fits right now, but my guess is if he's healthy, he's probably around number 5.
Doc, it felt like for the last half decade, at times you were just kind of screaming into the ether about using motion, how much better Iowa was when they used motion, and then they go away from it. A lot more motion, obviously, on Saturday that we saw. It's one game against an overmatched FCS team that wore down in the second half, but what they're trying to do stylistically, what was your takeaway with the Tim Lester offense and what they're doing and what that motion can be when they're taking on the good teams going forward?
I thought it was very vanilla. I thought they did a lot of motion. I mean, they motioned or traded, which is kind of like when their tight end, gets set and then kind of moves up and trades over to the other side on, 2 out of every 3 plays. But it was limited in when they did it, and they didn't use any kind of double motion. They didn't use any kind of trade over then motion. So it was incredibly vanilla in how they used it. And I think that was strategic because they wanted to get it kind of going. They wanted people to get used to it. But they also know that they've got a couple of bigger opponents mainly this week on their agenda that they really don't want to show too much, and they have a lot more to give. Even Jay Higgins said that afterwards. He's like, they didn't do any of the stuff that they were doing against us. So my guess is I thought overall it went well. Obviously, the statistics bear that out. I thought in the second half it was really effective. But I think it's going to be more in line this week with what we see the rest of the season.
Obviously, Tory Taylor's left some huge shoes behind to fill. Your thoughts on Reese Dakin's debut at Kinnick Stadium?
It was nice. Let's just say that. I mean, he averaged, 39 yards per punt. That was pretty good. He had 3 inside the 20. So, I mean, overall, it was a decent day statistically for him. I wasn't necessarily overwhelmed, but I also thought that he did the job. And when you're in your debut and you're playing against Illinois State at home, you're not necessarily needing them to park them inside the 5 or anything. I thought for a true freshman and playing in his first game, it was everything you could ask him for. Now, every now and then you're going to want him to do something a little bit more and show off the leg a little bit better. And I think he's more than capable of that. But for a debut, coming halfway across the world with fans of the stands, I think Iowa's pretty pleased with how he performed.
Scott Dochterman from The Athletic joining us here, and appreciate the time of Scott Dochterman. Always great insight from him. Mentioned Reese Dakin there, and obviously the punting that we saw from him. I wanted a little bit more. I was expecting a tick more, but I think Doc put it very well. He was completely fine. And I think there's going to be a lot more upside we're going to see going forward. And we certainly hope for that. Special teams, it's one of those difference makers. And what we saw from Caleb Weegan and what he's going to likely be as a punt returner, the juice that he's going to be able to provide. We'll see what they're going to do in the kick return game now. Caleb Johnson, kick returner at times throughout his career. But if he becomes RB1, do you want to go that direction with him? Still, special teams, LeVar Woods every single year has done such a great job. Drew Stevens coming back out there and knocking both of those field goals. And I'll be honest, sitting there and was on the opposite end of the field over in the north end zone. That's where our seats were on Saturday. And watching him just line up for that first kick, I had a couple of butterflies just because A, he's so important, B, he's really talented, and C, just how much it fell apart at the end of last season. But he was calm, cool, collected, did exactly what you want, knocking those field goals through and going to need, I'm sure, a bunch of big ones throughout the course of this year from number 18 and the Iowa special teams. We continue here, Locked On Hawkeyes. It is Cy-Hawk week. And we talk a little bit about the game, about the future of the game, about what it's like here in Central Iowa. For many of you outside of Central Iowa, it's different. I'll tell you that. We'll continue here. Get ready for the Cy-Hawk matchup. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. Hey, Locked On Hawkeye fans. I want to take a moment and give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game I think you're going to love just as much as I do. Ultimate College Football HC. In this awesome game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. Can you imagine being the head coach of the Hawkeyes? Here's your chance. From recruiting players and hiring coaching staff to overseeing training camps and handling school scholarships, you control every crucial detail of your program, and it's all in your hands. Will you be able to handle the pressure? Here's what I really love about the game. You're responsible for calling offensive plays during the games. Your strategy will not only determine the success of your football season, it'll also shape the future and legacy of your program. Ultimate College Football HC is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. And of course, we have a special offer for you here, Locked On Hawkeye fans. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, Locked On CFB, all caps, inside the game store. You're going to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure you take advantage of this perk. It's going to get your team off to a strong start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com, ultimate-cfb.com, or you can look it up in the app stores. Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. Trent Condon back with you one final time on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. I also want to let you know what we have going on here across the Locked On Network. We got you covered all the angles. Greg doing a great job with the Big Ten channel and college football being back in a big time way. The Locked On College Football podcast kicks off with a live preview, 6 o'clock on Tuesdays throughout the course of the season. Big series going on. You can jump aboard with everything that we have going on the Locked On Network. Myself and a bunch of the Big Ten crew, we're doing a weekly now Big Ten roundtable. Going to be having a lot of fun, throwing some barbs out there, having a good time with all the guys, all on Locked On College Football Podcast. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So it is Cy-Hawk week, and started Monday. Yes, I was working on Monday. Did not have Labor Day off with my radio show and my full-time gig here, along with doing, of course, Locked On Hawkeyes. And with that, being in Central Iowa. So I grew up in North Iowa, grew up in Osage. Well, actually grew up in New Haven, the great suburb. It's not a suburb. It's a little town 8 miles away from Osage. Osage doesn't have suburbs. And grew up in this little town. And growing up in the 80s, again, guy in my mid-40s, that's where I am. In the 80s, Iowa State wasn't a thing. And certainly Iowa State football wasn't. And yes, I know they played on a yearly basis, but in my mind as a young kid, there was nobody that was Cyclone fans. We had a couple of farm kids, had one of the families that ran a plant in town. That was it. And though Ames was actually closer, and being a farming community, you think there'd be a lot more Iowa State people. It wasn't the case, because everybody during that time, for the most part, was a Hawkeye fan. And that's how my 5, 7, 10-year-old mind worked, is you're just always a Hawkeye, right? And because Iowa State football was so bad during the 80s, and there were so many blowouts, it just was so rarely a game that it wasn't really a rivalry. Then I go off to college. My freshman year, Hayden's final season, is when the winning streak comes to an end, 27-9. And the losses continued as they stacked up 6 wins in a row. But I still lived in Eastern Iowa. Didn't cross paths a ton with Iowa State fans. Yes, the message board communities back then, that was annoying. It was bothersome. But for the most part, yeah, a couple of lippy friends that went to Iowa State, but it just wasn't a thing. And then I moved here to Des Moines and started my career, and also did some part-time radio work before jumping back into the radio world full-time about a decade back. And with that, this market is so different. And I try to tell other people here in Central Iowa, this rivalry is not the same as it is in Des Moines. The Cy-Hawk rivalry is as big as it gets. But that's not the case in Cedar Rapids. Yeah, you might work with somebody that's in Iowa State. You might have family members. And it's for our state. Still a huge game. But it's just a completely different stranglehold, the way that it really encompasses our daily lives in central Iowa compared to other places in the state. Wife's from Sioux City. It's Nebraska over there. Where I grew up, it was Minnesota, at least back in the day. Now, also the change in the rivalry from when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s compared to what it is today. I know that's also changed the complexion in a lot of areas. But go to Dubuque, Quad Cities, it's different. And it's just something that I always find interesting being back here in central Iowa comparison to a lot of you guys that are out there in different parts of the state. And then if you're talking about, I know we got a lot of listeners in Omaha, tons in Minneapolis and Chicago. And thank you to all you guys for jumping aboard. All those people, that rivalry then dissipates, I think, even more for a lot of them, and especially, for the people that went to Iowa, they were out of staters, they moved back maybe to Illinois, Minneapolis, whatever it is, and you have those circumstances too. Still, regardless of all that, this is a huge game this week. Now, Iowa cannot afford to take the goodwill from last week, what they were created, and a little bit of momentum on a national scale. Now, listening to the national podcast, listening to national talking heads on ESPN and the other places throughout the weekend, it started as a little bit of a ribbing. We got to be able to take that, though. But if this offense continues to show competency, we're really talking about something maybe special for this season. You can't give it back. Iowa State, I thought, looked dreadful for long stretches of their game against North Dakota. The opening play of the game. So I'm listening to the game on the way back. They throw this big play up the field. John Walters, their radio voice, is going crazy, him and Eric Heft. And then I see the replay. It was the first play of the game, and Rocco Beck just chucked it up. Didn't read the defense, just chucked it. And Jalen Knoll, their wide receiver, made a tremendous play. Iowa State's got great receivers. Their defensive line, for the first time in a long time, actually is not only good and talented, but it has some depth to go along with it. Those are the strengths of the team. And Rocco Becht is a good quarterback. Those are the strengths of the team, though. Wide receiver, defensive line, and quarterback. Short of that, Iowa has, I think, a major, major advantage at every other position. The offensive line for Iowa State was not good again. Tight ends, Ben Brahmer, who had a nice season last year as a redshirt freshman, was MIA. Tried to get him to him a couple times. Their offensive line's a mess. The running backs, Abu Sama's banged up. Carson Hansen is They brought in a kid from Eastern Michigan. He's their number 3, kind of their third down specialist and returner. It's like 5'5". Linebackers, Caleb Bacon gets hurt. They don't have much depth at that spot. I think that's why you're seeing more 4-man fronts out of Iowa State this year than compared to what they've done over the last 5-6 years. Their safeties are good. Their cornerbacks are pretty good. But overall, not just this is a winnable game. We need to see Iowa open this thing up a little bit and really run away and hide. We've seen this a few times. We've seen Iowa be able to do that, but the opportunity is there. Just strangle them out. Control it, dominate it, frustrate them, take them out of what they want to do, get that Kinnick Stadium charged up in a big-time way. I think it has a chance to happen. We'll talk about it here throughout the course of the week and break things down on all the angles. That's what we do here for you on Locked On Hawkeyes, with you each and every day. And thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen today. Now go check out Locked On College Football Podcast. From NIL deals to the never-ending conference realignment rumors, Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for the season and what's ahead on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We got more coming up this week. One final look back. Got the numbers from Pro Football Focus, what we can take out of those numbers and take a look forward. We'll continue to break down the matchup against Iowa State and what this very well could be for Iowa football in 2024. I think it has a chance to be special. Thanks for being with us as always. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Go Hawks.